Hey, morning there, Travis. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing well. Can you hear me okay this morning?
Yes, sir.
All right. How's your week been so far?
Fast.
I know I literally was like, this whole week got away from me. I was like, had this whole plan. I was gonna put everyone's like cell phones into the app and like text them all individually and remind them. And I'm like, wait, it's already Thursday morning. Like
I
this.
know. I mean, I'm glad you sent that email reminder out because I was like, "Oh, crap, I just
I
lost."
know. Well, I'll send one out again today. And then I think some people asked for the recordings. I've got a lot of interest in people. I think it's just a matter of getting on people's calendars and then,
Mhm.
uh, just try to make that happen. So, yeah. How's ministry stuff going for you?
It's going pretty good. Sorry, I'm on lunch break too, so I'm kind of double dipping.
You're fine. Don't you worry.
Um, so we're a campus of Alive, but our campus pastor just took a senior pastor position at another church, so we're kind of in this weird, you know, transitional period. So trying to
Yeah.
find new campus
Yeah.
path.
Yeah. So who was your campus pastor? Who was the
Mark Tolan.
okay, yeah, okay. Yep. So
Um, his
man,
dad Dave has stepped in uh,
okay.
for now, but it's just kind of interim, until we
Yeah.
can find a
Yeah.
permanent solution.
Yep. And how like how what's the size of that campus compared? Because Alive's main campus is pretty what are your numbers?
They're running around, I think, like 1,500 or so.
Okay.
We're more like 75.
Okay.
So
Yep.
we're
Yep.
very small. But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. How far away are you guys from the main campus?
about 20 minutes, so not too
Okay.
bad. Yeah.
Okay. So you're a little ways away, but not it's not horrible. So, but
No.
yeah.
We were just kind of a standalone church up until like 2018, and our senior pastor resigned. And it was me and worship leader and a couple other board members trying to run it, and we all had full-time jobs, and it was too much, and we were about to shut the doors. And then I had a friend at Alive, and we were just talking about it because I told him, I was like, well, I might start coming there since when we shut down. And then that got the conversation started, and they kind of partnered with us, and we became a campus. So
Yeah.
it's been good.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, it's campusing was, huge, the past 20 years. And it's like it just depends on locations where you're at. We're the same way here in Greeley, Windsor, where our Greeley campus just continues to thrive in person attendance. In the
Mhm.
States, we can be up, I think we're up like 280 over this time last year in Greeley, but Windsor kind of COVID really hit small campuses hard. And so we were probably more like 120 adults before then, and more like you're saying 60 to 80, depending on nights. And kids can be all over the place from 6 or 8 kids to 25 kids. It just all
That's the
depends.
way we are. Yeah.
Yeah, your youth could be 5 kids or it could be 12 or 18 kids. It just, it's all over the map. So, and so it's just an interesting thing. And the other thing too is I feel like church buildings used to be worth nothing, but now they're actually super attractional in communities.
Oh
And so
yeah.
we're like in a community too where there's nothing to buy, there's nothing to build. To build would cost a fortune, and so we're like, to build a sanctuary that holds 250 with a few small group classrooms, 2 offices, and an extra room with a parking lot on 5 acres is 10 to 15 million dollars
Oh
for
yeah.
this
Easy.
tiny little, what you get today. So we're like, can't do that. So that's not going to happen. So we're just, we're leasing a property a night for, we basically took over a church's property for just a night service. And it's to our benefit because it pays, we only pay $500 a week. But again,
Oh,
we're
yeah.
not out a ton. So at least, and we get to keep everything there. And we've been able to do some upgrades for them and stuff. So, but
Good.
it's a lot of, campusing right now, depending on where you're at, it's a lot of work.
We
Just
uh we launched in September of 2019. So it was like as soon as we got launched, then COVID happened. And so it was like we I don't think we've really ever had a true launch. It's just
yeah,
been like relaunch or something, I don't know. It's
it's
been
kind
weird.
of kind of what it feels like, man. Kind of what it feels like. So
Mhm.
it's just like, man, lots happening there. But yeah, we got some
Oh
cool
yeah.
stuff. coming down the pike here too for young adult ministry stuff too. So did you say you're going to be at Follow this year, or will you guys alive be there?
Yeah, we'll
Or
be there.
okay,
I'm
will
very
you be there? You'll be
excited.
there. Will you
I'll be
be there?
there.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, it looks like we're going to be partnering with, and again, I'll have more details next week, but we're going to be partnering with a big young adult ministry thing that's run through Indiana Wesleyan through Amanda Drury. And so there's actually going to be, it looks like we're trying to get a mealtime put together and put a whole thing together where we're actually looking for cohorts of, she's looking for cohorts. They've got a whole thing put together. I'll explain all this as we get closer in time, but she'll probably jump on a call later. But cohorts where you can actually apply for money for young adult ministry, which is super cool. There's huge
Yeah.
grant money for it. So there's like different ways to look at it and do it. And I could imagine Alive not jumping in there and being like, hey, and so a lot of it's learning together. A lot of it's going to be, freeing up to, $1,000 up to even $15,000 to just try things with young adults and report back, and like retreats and stuff a part of it. So they are, we're working together with the Hyatt Regency to put a meal together there. And looks like, and she's also working with Steve Argue and I to get him there as well too on the 29th or 30th. So we're trying to see which day works best. And so yeah, we're actually really amping up like quite a bit of stuff there, especially knowing we'll have most of our DSs and probably a lot of our pastors and stuff like that. What can we actually do in this season to train people with young adult ministry? So at least get the ball rolling. It's going to take a while to momentum, like anything else, like the flywheel. It's going to take a while to get this thing in motion, but man, the more of us we can get talking about it, the better and stuff like that. So, but yeah, hey, let's just talk through chapter 2 again. This will be super laid back. It's just you and I, and
Yeah, no, that's fine.
which will be good. But would love to know, like, hey, like what hit you? I'm just kind of walking through the pages here, but
Let me pull it up. Sorry.
yeah, no, pull it up here. I'll read a couple things here. Kind of starts off with this whole, faith in young adults and growing young adult churches, or growing young churches. And so again, I don't know if you're familiar with the Growing Young book that Fuller Youth Institute did a few years back. I was all a part of I was generations when I was in the youth ministry role. We were a young adult or a growing young, we were part of their cohort in Pasadena, and it was great. And so I think these same principles at the end of chapter 2 apply to, again, young adult ministry, just like it does student ministry and everything else too. But the faith in of young adults, kind of looking at that, I love how, just reading through on page 28, it said, Danielle put it this way: young adults don't care about the church's institutional survival. They're facing real needs, loneliness, losing parents, and how to adapt in a changing world. With all this, perpetuating a system is not worth investing in. But if the church's purpose connects with their longings, they see it more worthwhile. And I thought, boy, that's a great way of, and so I was maybe just ask that question. Do you see some of that with the young adult ministry stuff that you're working with, where again, they're going to be somewhat church skeptical, but very Jesus oriented?
Yeah, and it's kind of hard to explain in a way because it's like the way, I guess the best way to explain it is, it seems like, with youth, when you get to the end of that, when you graduate, all the training wheels fall off, right? Like you gain all this independence and stuff. And it seems like some of them are ready for it, but then some of them are not. Like they need that little bit more of structure and support. And, it's like they're kind of just been thrown out in the ocean and don't know which way to swim, kind of thing. That's kind of the sense I've got from our young adults. As far as like, what are my next steps? What am I supposed to be doing? What does it look like? And then kind of like you were talking about with the whole idea of like how that impacts their faith. I think they're hungry. They're just hungry for that kind of connection. But they don't know what that looks like, because some of them are not married, some of them are going to school, they're not hanging out with friends, that kind of thing, or the same friends that they had before. So I guess it's just finding that place. If they were in youth, if they were younger, it was easy to kind of have that cohesion and that together. But once all that kind of things change and graduate and you move on, trying to figure out what that next step looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's probably one of the biggest things we're going to talk to in this chapter is like, again, it's so unique and different from moving past student ministries and moving into that next phase of life. And sometimes, again, we'll get to this in saying here, it's again where young adult ministry. So oftentimes we just need to focus on people over programs. We are super good at the church of ours, like establishing programs and a pipeline, and we're going to establish leaders, and we're going to actually take them through something versus like probably stepping back and actually just putting them at the forefront of it all. So put the people, put the young adults in whatever we're doing, put them top and focus in on them and relationally with them, and you're probably going to find yourself in a much better place. And that's kind of what we're seeing here a little bit at Generations too, is like, man, we used to be so program heavy, like, hey, we're going to have a lunch after church and we're going to do a Halloween party and we'd have all these events and s'more nights and this and that. And music nights, we're going to try to do this. But what we found was that, again, the more we just poured into young adults. So again, they're going to have limited time, limited resources. But where we find the most success is young adult small groups are like off the charts right now. We've got high school, or I should say college age guy ones, college age gal ones. We've got young adult ones. We've got all kinds of different ones and that are going. And then what we find is like we already have church too. So it's interesting, they come into service, and then if we do a few things, we got them in serving roles and stuff like that, which gets them super connected. But I think again, it's people over program. I think it's the whole like even pulling it way back. And my wife and I will be hosting the residents here at our house in a couple of weeks on a Friday night, and we're going to invite a bunch of young people along with them. So we have 4 residents, but again, one of them can't make it, but we'll probably invite another dozen young adults to just come and hang out at the house, play some games, no agenda to it other than having and creating deep conversation. And they tend to just eat that stuff up, which is great. So, which would be which is a lot of fun. So, are you seeing some of that stuff? I mean, and maybe even the question too I'd ask, kind of coming into there. Hey, welcome there, Jaden. Good to see you today. Would be how maybe I'll ask it this way too, and Jaden, you and Travis can jump in on here. Like, where do you see your congregation as being accepting of young adults? Like, do you find most people are very open to it? Not necessarily staff, but like the people. Like, are people open to it? Do they get frustrated? Do they complain about young adults, or where are they kind of at with young adults?
Our congregation, they kind of, the ones that I've talked to, like I have there's and I think I might have mentioned it last time, there's a married couple. They actually have a young adult, well, 2 of them, in their house. And they were all about it. They were like, oh, that's awesome, that's amazing. Like they have friends that go to other churches that don't have a young adult, kind of group. Can they come with us, that kind of thing. So we've been very accepting, which our congregation is usually pretty supportive of all of our kind of next gen kind of things. But like you were saying earlier about the relational stuff, I had a friend who has a young adult group, and I kind of went to him because he does student ministry too, and was like, hey, how did you do it? And he's like, yeah, it's all about relationships. Like, don't try to program anything, don't try to schedule, like just let it flow naturally. And they'll have a cereal night where they just bring cereal and they're like, just sit down and eat. And he said start out like that, and then let it just kind of let it kind of morph into whatever fits their needs. So I thought that was kind of, when I was reading through the chapter, that kind of really made a lot of sense.
That's good. Yeah. And I think even a question there, Jaden, I'd love to hear from you. Like, hey, how is the church, or do you sense, people get frustrated with young adults sometimes of like, hey, where are all the young adults? Like, and it too, Jaden, from both sides of being in youth ministry and now like young adult stuff of like, man, where did everybody go? And are they coming back? And some do and some don't. And so, yeah, how are the people, not necessarily staff, but congregation, do you ever hear things positive and negative? And then maybe the question I'll ask all of us too is, what does it look like to put people before our young adult ministry program? So that's kind of that. I think, Travis, you got that, but I'd love to hear from you, Jaden, on that.
Yeah, I would say in the past like several years, as we're in a transition as a church, more people accepting like young adults and really wanting to hear their voice and their heart and um their lead on a lot of things. Where I was at, we're doing construction around here, and the main reason why we are doing it is for the next generation, that they want to be here and stay after service. And have seen that, but our just space hasn't allowed for it for people to be around comfortably and want to stay. We see a lot of young adults after service wanting to be here. So it's just, we hope that it'll just keep increasing. And the young adults have led the whole construction project. And so that's really cool just to be entrusted with a big budget for that, and it's coming out of the church, and being entrusted to really oversee that and to create something that my generation wants to be part of. They want to be here. They bring their friends and they're super excited. So I would say there's people that we still have to continue to be trusted with. And it's like the verse, a lot of young adults are like, well, the verse of don't look down on people that are younger than you. And it's like, yes, but like what it says after that is like, but you need to live a life that is glorifying of God, that's pleasing. And so you can't just be like, well, I'm young, like all my ideas are great and my heart is good. It's like, you actually have to see, we have to see the fruit for the older generation to really want to trust and to look to you for guidance. So I think there's both. There's a lot of people that are trusting and wanting young adults to really lead and step into what the next season of the church is, but there are also some people that are mourning that. And yeah, so I see both, and I feel both on a lot of different occasions.
Mm-hmm. Love it. Love it. And I think, again, you just said it best too. I think, again, there is when you stop and think about even like a young adult's life, like we'll find newer students, and again, students, young adults, these 18 to 29, 34-year-olds who after church, sometimes if they're new, they kind of bolt out because they're like, oh man, like I came and like I want out of here, like I'm not ready. But for those who get connected, like when you stop and think about it, like, they'd have to go home, cook a meal, hang together. They've already taken the time to come to church and be around. And I think you're right, Jane. Like we find that same thing too. Like our young adult, like marrieds who come to the first service, like literally hang in the lobby with babies and talk as the second service is getting going. And it's been a new thing. It's been cool to see, like, and it's just always like so many people hanging. I think you could create that atmosphere. The same thing with our college age students too, who have come to maybe the first service and have served and have gone to service. You see them hanging, even if it's a small pack of 4 or 6 of them. Like it's just as pastorally, like it's just so encouraging to see them, wearing their G Kid shirt or whatever it may be, or that they're just there hanging. And oftentimes it just ends up leading the conversation where they're going to go grab food and do something. So that's why I think, again, kind of this thought here of how do we what's it look like to put people before your young adult ministry programs. It's entering probably into those conversations even more when I want to rush out to get home to watch football or have a meal at home with family. Like, hey, what can I actually do to engage with young adults before I leave church? Or how can maybe we just want to take them out to lunch because I can actually afford to pay for young adults to go out to lunch, like 3 live in my home. And so it's like, hey, let's just go grab mod pizza and a drink. And it may cost me something, but what I learn from them and when I get to invest in them is way greater. And so what else would you guys say? What does it look like to put people before programs? And I know that's a change in the shift in the church, but how else would you guys, what else do you see that working in your ministry networks?
I guess the main thing is just really seeing how each one of them are different, because it feels like each one of them have a different background. They have a different experience. And a lot of times I think they're, in my opinion, they're those that are, in that maybe 18 to 22 range, they're looking for someone they can connect with, like somebody that has like similar interests. It's like they're kind of restarting again once they've kind of graduated and moved on and pursued different things. And then you got like the second group, like the 22 to like whatever 28ish, 29, 30, that are, they're kind of like those you were talking about, the starting a family, getting married, that kind of thing, and they're looking to connect with people. So I guess it just looks like, trying to understand, who they are, getting to know them. It's that whole relational piece she was getting back to at the beginning, just getting to know who they are.
That's good. Good stuff. Hey, let's jump into kind of the pages here in the book here. Young Adult Ministry now, pages like 30, starts around 30 and keeps going until about 32-ish, something like that. But it's kind of like, I love how Steve wrote here, help your church stop panicking by reframing the stories they hear about young adults' faith. And thought it was really good here. Kind of this whole idea, again, kind of the stories we're hearing, and kind of even just looking at some of the different things as far as like young adults are leaving the church. So again, we hear some of these phrases all the time, like the young adults are leaving the church. Like where are all the people? Where have they gone? What happened to all these kids who graduated high school? And again, if you guys have been in student ministry around it, which you have, you realize that most high schoolers have left even way before they got to college. Like by the time you almost get to that senior year, like the trend in youth ministry has been like, it's so easy to ramp up this massive middle school ministry through 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Kind of like even like follow 2023, like we know like the biggest group of students who attend will probably be a 14 or 15-year-old girl. Like it'll be the biggest that attends, and you're probably not going to, one of the smaller ones is probably going to be 17 and 18-year-old boys, right? It just tends to be the nature of it. And I've even stopped and thought from a perspective of people and programming, when you stop and think about even like programming, think about like how long it takes to even if you think about the world today. And I was thinking about this the other day, like imagine trying to program for 7 years, and if you met as a youth ministry for almost 50 weeks out of the year, like you're going to offer a student from 6th to 12th grade like 350 nightly experiences, like on a Sunday or Wednesday night. Like in the world we live in today, like it almost seems ludicrous. I've been a pastor for almost 3 decades, right? Like it almost seems crazy, like because we just, so much of what we do in life we just don't do sustained and over time anymore, or it's just changed. And so I just think, again, we've seen this trend of huge middle school, high school kind of goes 9th grade, all of a sudden things come, work starts happening and going, it kind of tends and goes down. And again, we're starting to see, we're starting to see numbers increase in student ministries, I think, across America. But again, I think even just that thought of like, where are the young adults leaving the church? You can even see it too. Certain student ministries have huge numbers of midweek program, but if you look at the weekend numbers, those kids who come, if you got 100, 150 students who come in midweek, when you come to the weekend, you may be like, where are all these kids at? Where do they attend Sunday services and stuff? So young adults, this concept of young adults leaving the church, where, as opposed to I love how they talked about that the trends really haven't changed, since the 70s. It's not that big of a group. And I love how it says, while they may be attending church less, the reasons are rarely theological and don't have, they necessarily mean that they've lost their faith. So again, I think a lot of people, like, they've left the church, they've lost their faith. But that it typically isn't the case that we're finding with it. It's more likely they're trying to figure out life on their own, getting settled in a new community, learning how to adapt to a new schedule. Young adults leaving church may be less about protesting church and more a symptom of their priorities demanding their attention, crowding out their spiritual lives, in the world in which they live in. So again, kind of a talking point here is young adults are in transition. How might we recognize their journeys and adjust our expectations about how they participate? So I'd love to hear that from you guys. You guys are in the world of young adults. So how might we recognize their journeys and adjust our expectations about how they participate? And you can think of that through you guys who are younger, working with young adults, and also in your mind too, like even as a church, how do we reframe that?
I think it's important to meet young adults where they're at, but not compromise on like the truth of God's word. So it's like, yes, the local church and the Sabbath day is so important, but not to put the expectation where, like, if you don't do that like right away, then like your relationship with God can't grow. And I think maybe that has been an expectation put on young adults of like, you need to be in church, you need to do all of this, like check the box, but to meet them where they're at, but not compromise on the truth, because they want the truth. They want to be part of something bigger themselves and to live a life that is not as hurtful, and they wake up every day with pain and struggle with like mental illness. Like they obviously desperately need Jesus, and they need a savior and a Lord. And so to meet them where they're at, but not to compromise the truth. And I think that just comes with relationship, and how you disciple one person is not going to be the same as someone that's struggling with maybe the same thing, but their journey and experiences have been different. And so obviously it's just continuing as us pastors to um, keep getting resourced and spending time in the word personally, and just relying on the Holy Spirit, like how to navigate those conversations with different young adults. um yeah, so I think it goes back to it's about people, it's about relationship more than it is about a system or a program.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Any thoughts that you'd have, Travis?
No, I just echo those, and um, seems like the young adults I've talked to, they just want a little bit of authenticity. They just want some, like, us being real with them. Um, and Jaden was saying, making sure that we're expressing that through God's truth and everything, because I feel like a lot of times they have so many different perspectives and information coming into them. They just don't always know um, what's the right path, or which is the right way to go. So they're just looking for that somebody to be real with them, and kind of give them that sometimes, I guess you say, hard truth. You know what I mean? So yeah.
Yeah, I think again, like what's interesting is, again, I've kind of said this for quite a while there. It's like you stop and look back to like students who are younger, like a middle school kid comes into a program in a church, just kind of asking the question of their mind, whether they realize or not, like, do they, talking about leaders and everybody, like them, right? Like you're just insecure as a middle school kid. And so I've always said, if you can give a middle school kid their name, if you can go, where do they go to school, like, what grade they're in, like, oh, hey, Jaden, you're in 7th grade, you go to Sioux Falls Christian School. It's, you can, all of a sudden in their mind, it actually like, oh, there's an adult who likes me. High school kids kind of shift that, right, too, when you get to that 9th, 10th grade, or it's like, do we as high school kids like the leaders? Like, do we actually like the youth pastor? Do we like our small group leaders? Which is why oftentimes high school kids are like, I like coming to church, but I don't like my small group leader. Can I switch groups? And I gotta do it. Because again, there's more of a likability. It switches from do they like me to a do I like them? And I think again, that young adult phase is like, they don't care whether you like them or you like it's, are you living it out? Like, is what you're saying actually the truth, and are you willing to actually live your life out in a way and invest relationally? And I think that's the big thing. Like, they're not looking to be liked. They're secure enough, and they're not looking, do I like you? They're willing to they've already lived enough life to realize, like, hey, I'm not going to like everybody, and not everybody's going to like me, but is the person who's speaking truly care? Are they authentic? Are they real? Do they really care about my soul and who I am? Do they have, as we're going to talk about in a minute, empathy towards me and towards life and situation? And again, how can we speak truth? And so I think, again, it goes back to a little bit we talked about last week, is how can we just be curious and ask questions and really invest in them? And so again, maybe I love one of the talking points that had on here, page 32. Maybe young adults not showing up at our church is more about our lack of understanding than their lack of faithfulness. And how might we change to support them? And so part of it, I wonder too, it's this shift as we create momentum for young adults in the Wesleyan churches. How do we maybe have to switch and to change some things there? And it was interesting. I think at the top of page 32, it said someone casually suggested, what if we held church at 9 p.m. rather than 9 a.m. right? Like for a community of people who tend to be around and open later, like, hey, why not? It's like our 20-year-old who's at Boulder, who's an RA. She was home with one of her other RA friends last week, and it was Saturday night, and we were like getting ready to go to bed, and we're like, man, like we're again, I'm getting old, right? Like I'm almost 50. Like I'm like, dude, like I got church tomorrow. And she stopped at the house about 5:30, doing dinner and stuff. She's like, yeah, we're gonna get ready later. We're gonna go swing dancing at Sundance in Fort Collins. But we're going to leave here about 9:45 and get there at 10 and dance till 12:30 and then go back to Boulder an hour and then be at church in the morning. And in my mind, I'm like, and then she even pulled other young adults from a community 45 minutes away who attended Generations campus. And they literally, Rachel got home at 2 o'clock in the morning and was there at church for the 10:30 service. And so it's just interesting how different the lifestyles are, right? And so again, how do we like pull into some of that, or how do we actually listen to what's happening? And that doesn't mean we have to do everything that late at night, but again, it's a whole different lifestyle, whole different change. Even when we're bringing residents and people over, like we have to think about that too. Like when we have them over in a couple of weeks, like sure, I would have an adult couple over on a Friday night at 5:30 or 6, but most likely they're going to be leaning towards what's later, or if they do come earlier and they leave by 8, they're probably going to go out and do something until midnight, right? It's just the lifestyle they're in. So I think again, how do we, maybe young adult is not showing up at the church is more about a lack of understanding them. And I think again, that's where we can be curious, ask lots of questions. I think that's what this next year is going to be, honestly, in this discovery for young adult ministry, in the Global Wesleyan Church in North America, of how do we push things forward, is doing a lot of listening and a lot of like, hey, what works? Because again, what works in one region is not going to work in another. But I think there are probably common principles we're finding. People over programs is going to be a big one. They're not abandoning their faith. They're probably just in a different stage of life and transition. And how do we come alongside them? And again, I think this is probably a big one for us to reframe too with our churches, is that, again, they may not be in services or they may not be around as much, but again, it's not because of their lack of desire to put Jesus high in their life. And so, but again, I think you guys have both shared it too. Like, how do we come alongside them and speak the truth in love and still make sure that we're calling them to live, set apart, to live a life that's holy and pleasing to God. And again, challenge them just like we would anybody else. So, yeah, let's go in here. On page 33, talked a little bit about young adults. The nuns they don't believe in God. But it actually talked about, there was a book that came out a couple years back, The Rise of the Nuns, and it's that, who don't claim any religious affiliation, right? I actually find this fascinating with a lot of young adults who don't want to be, again, labeled with anything, right? Like there's a big thing. They're spiritually curious, but again, to be labeled, as to even use the word Christian, to use the word, lots of stuff. They just don't like labels oftentimes in the world that they live in. But it's interesting, it goes on to say, in fact, 29% of Americans identify as nuns. And that would be the non-religious identification has surpassed mainline Protestant and that of evangelicals. So again, it's an interesting thought. Similar surveys report 35% of those under the age of 35 hold this identity that, and again, I don't even know that it's even all that true, as much as I think it is true to a degree as we become more, live in a more post-Christian culture. But I don't think it's their lack and desire to know who Jesus is or even to talk about spiritual things. It's just maybe this identifying piece. And so, most religious nuns believe in God or a higher power. So let's find ways to connect with them rather than assume they don't care about spirituality. What do you sense there with that? It's just, again, it's something I see a lot, and I just would be curious you guys' thoughts there on people. So.
I think not so much of not wanting to, like you said, label themselves as a certain, Christian, whatever. It just seems like a lot of them just have, like, they have questions about things going on in the world and things going on. I mean, like we all do, really, but they just have questions, and I think a lot of that shapes like what their next steps are. They're wanting to, hey, I have these list of questions. Depending on what answers I get for it, then that's going to determine what I do next, kind of thing. So I hear that a lot.
Mm-hmm. Or what about even like on page 34, it talks about just wait, they'll be back, right? Like sometimes it's just like, hey, like if we could just wait it out, like they're going to come back to the church. And we do see some of that, right? Like sometimes people, and I used to say, well, like once the young adult generation slows down a little bit, they get through college, they get through a transition, they get married. And then the big one, when they start having kids, right? So that used to be the like, Well, when you start having a kid, you start asking, going, hey, like I need to find a way to spiritually invest in the life of my little ones. And so there is a bump for some of that. But what do you guys hear that? Just wait, they'll be back. Do you hear that from church people or from staff or people like, or, hey, well, if we just wait it out? I think again, what was interesting that he noted was that it's maybe longer than what it used to be. So it's more like a decade, not just a few years, but like, ooh, this is a much longer gap. The churches assume that the gap at a maximum 5 years, and they seem to think that they can wait it out, but young adults know it's more like a decade and can't wait for churches to understand. And I thought that's an interesting thought there. Any conversation pieces there from either of you?
Yeah, I mean, for like in South Dakota and the Midwest, like we see a lot of people get married around like the 24 to 26. Like I would say that's probably like the average. And I don't know if that's just because there's nothing else to do in the Midwest, so they just want to get married. But what we have been doing as a church is really focusing on like marriage and family, because um that's very what Sioux Falls is. There's a ton of young families here in Sioux Falls that are in the medical field, they're in business and banking, like that's what Sioux Falls is. And so they need a lot of them, they need the church to get married. They need a pastor. And that's an opportunity for us to be like, hey, like where have you been at? Like let's get you involved in the community and have a relationship with you, and not just focus on your wedding day, but everything that comes before that and comes after that. And that's a target piece that we're really starting at our church. And we've seen um, like very successful in that, and seeing even people that are like, hey, we got married in all the wrong ways. We need the church now. And they're still newly married. So that's something that we're doing as a church. And that's directly impacts young adults as well.
Love it. I'll speak into that. And then Travis, you want to share something there? I think you're right on, Jaden, with something there that oftentimes pastorally, sometimes like weddings and funerals, we can look at it and be like, man, it takes so much of our time. Like to do the premarital counseling, depending on how we do it. Maybe it's at a Friday night rehearsal, Saturday night wedding, and then we have church on Sunday, and we've got a young family and stuff like that. Or a funeral is just, again, I always say like the funerals are never convenient. Doesn't matter the age, doesn't matter, if you're not connected pastoral, they can be like, it can just feel like it can interrupt a week. But what I have found, and I love where you're going with this with young adults, is in the marriage piece, because again, most of them are going to need somebody pastorally if they're looking for someone to jump in there and do it. And I think that's kind of a huge window of like opportunity. And I'm actually finding that to be true as far as like a way to, with weddings and funerals, of how we can reach our community in a much healthier way, right? Like what would it look like again if we continue to come around young adults and just said, hey, we're a church, we're going to help with weddings, whatever it takes. We've got a few pastors and people, because again, it's kind of like you have them held hostage a little bit too. Like you're going to meet with them, you're going to talk about faith, you're going to ask questions, and I think I love that thought of what you guys are doing there. And again, for older adults or for families in the community too, I think, and that's why I'd say funerals are kind of like the exact same thing. Like it's maybe not the most convenient, but when you stop and think, if you can meet people in a time of need, how huge is this? And again, if you can come alongside of a family for a wedding, like, man, it's just, again, it's incredible time. So love it there. Travis, what are some thoughts you have?
Yeah, no, I echo that. The whole idea of just wait, they'll be back, because I feel like, and just from my perspective on not so much our ministry, but just ministry in general, there's priorities and there's resources, and it feels like a lot of those resources get pushed towards those families with kids, and then there's like a little hierarchy. And I think young adults was one of those where it's like, okay, we're just not going to invest any resources or time into that, because eventually they'll come back, kind of thing. And I'm glad that it's starting to change, and you're starting to see more of a, like they have a place. It's not just kids, students, and then, your regular congregation. That young adults is actually getting that attention and those resources that they needed before.
Yeah, which is great, which kind of moves us into this next section of the book here that I thought was actually fascinating. It actually, on pages 35, 36, it talked all about this word faithing versus just faith and doubt. And so this idea of help your church see that faithing young adults will and must engage doubt. And I love how he just said, faith might better be understood as faithing. Faithing is a verb, an active process rather than a static state. For young adults, it often means they're renegotiating their beliefs as they encounter new experiences, learn new information, and even question their religious upbringings. Faithing is work we all do, but it can be especially intense and vulnerable work for those in transition, such as young adults. Yet many will preserve because they want their faith to be reliable, able to keep up with the increasing complex lives. So, and then it kind of goes on to like part of faithing is doubting. And again, doubting for many people in the church can feel as unfaithful. And so, oftentimes people believe that, doubt is the absence of faith, when oftentimes it's actually not at all. It's actually, again, we all are curious. We all have doubts. We all have things we have to work through. I would say probably the word I hear the most right now is, students, again, young adults who just say, it's this whole, they have to like break their theology and break their backing and stuff down and kind of rebuild it up. And I just hear that all the time from students, and it's maybe this whole idea of, and so I don't know, what are your thoughts there as far as, look at it maybe from a staff perspective as you're working with young adults, but maybe think of a church overall. Are people okay with doubts that people have in a season and time and walking them through? And I don't know, what are your thoughts on this word faithing too as a verb versus just a, kind of, I just thought it was super fascinating topic here.
Yeah, I think because a lot of times people associate like doubts with like unbelief, there's that, I don't know, it's like a one of those kind of catchwords that people kind of put together or whatever, because I don't think they really understood what it meant. Like overall, you know what I mean? People think, well, even as an adult, if you have doubts, then that means your faith is not strong. We actually in our student ministry are doing a whole series on this. So it was interesting to see like even the older students, like the seniors, talk about that and how like, they said the same words you said, Ian, kind of like, they're trying to restructure their faith, or like they're trying, a lot of times, faith as you're younger kind of comes about as, what people have told you, and you don't have those so much experiences, but as they have those experiences, they get to kind of rebuild their faith. And that I like how they modeled it as like faithing. I think that's a good way to put it, because it is something that's continually, happening. It's an action. It's you putting it into action. So that, I thought that was pretty cool too.
Yeah, I think again, you hear a lot of this, people, kind of probably the buzzword is they need to deconstruct, right? Like it's kind of a, I've had to learn to accept it. It's kind of one of those. I know, Jay, why don't you talk about that? Because I feel like you're part of the much younger generation. Like you probably hear that all the time, and know people who use that. What are your thoughts?
That's where my brain went, was like, just sounds like deconstruction. And sadly, I think deconstruction it's a good thing. And I think we all have done it in our life. Like I grew up in the church, I grew up in the Wesleyan church, and naturally my beliefs were just formed by my parents and how we did church. Like the first time that I actually went to a different church was at Bible college. And I'm like, wow, they actually do church differently than I've always experienced. And that was a really good eye-opening thing for me. Um, and I really had to look at all my beliefs and figure them out for myself. Like, do I really believe this about this? And I wrestled through it, and it was really hard because I'm like, no, like I feel wrong because that's not what I grew up with. So I think in that sense, but deconstruction has become like demolishing of people's like faith, and it's like they just think like, oh, I'm deconstructing, so like now I don't believe in God and I don't go to church. And I'm like, that's a really dangerous place to be, but that's the reality. And I've seen that with a lot of people that I went to college, like they're not in ministry anymore, they don't go to church anymore. And it's like, I don't I don't know what happened, and I think that's something that we're gonna have more of an answer probably like 5-10 years down the road, because that's something so new. And yeah, so I don't know, deconstruction is a hard thing, and how people have twisted it now is just, they're just
Yeah.
completely destroying like everything that they know, and I'm like, that's a that's a bad place to be. So
Yep. As opposed to when you stop and think about it, like deconstruction is we're going to deconstruct stuff to build it back up. Right.
yeah,
And then I always say too, is like anything you would do, like think of that terms there, like even as this may be a really bad illustration. I've not thought this through. So, but if you look at everything that's happening over in Gaza right now, like everything is just being destroyed. But there's going to have to be a time of rebuilding, and it's going to take, and what you're going to need is the experts to come along and to do it. Like not just any, and that's why I'm a big thing with like, hey, like, well, if we're going to, there's nothing wrong with thinking about it, talking about it. But again, if you have young adults who everything, and this is one of my big pet peeves, is I'm going to speak as a parent here, not as a leader. When I ask, like, hey, who have you ran this through? And every single person you're going to say is your age, you're just going for peers and you're not actually looking for wisdom from elders. And that's why I go, like, I think it's great to have doubts or be curious and ask questions and stuff. And there may be, I think, again, we all probably have things we have to deconstruct that are there. And then we build it back up. But who are we building it back up with? Who's coming alongside of us? And that's where I think we as young adult leaders can come alongside of young adults who are deconstructing their faith without even realizing it. They're just asking questions. And man, maybe life looks a little bit different. And hey, for the first time, here's what I'd say too, 18 to 22-year-olds tend to be, that age range tends to be when your faith comes even more alive, because again, your brain is actually cognitively able to like think and process and like actually like put more time and energy and effort into it. And you tend to be in a different stage of life versus like high school where you have all this swirling stuff going. And so you think about it from that way too. There probably is a deconstruction, because it's like, hey, or just these curious, or I'm going to work through these doubts or different things. I love it here too. It's the Great Commission was actually one of my favorites. Favorite, as Matthew 28 ends, it says, then the 11 disciples left for Galilee, going to the mountain where Jesus told them to go. It says, when they saw him, talking about Jesus, they worshiped him, but some still doubted. Then Jesus said, all authority in heaven and earth have been given to me. So think about it. They worshiped him, but some still doubt. Now, was this like a doubt, like, oh my gosh, like, but think about what even they've been through as these would be young adults. I mean, they worship, but still had some doubt in there. And that's why I look and go like, man, we see this all throughout even scripture itself. And so again, it's not about, and again, what does Jesus do and what do they end up doing and how they end up living in Acts is way different than before. But again, they were probably curious, like, well, he actually did come back, and where actually is the movement of the Holy Spirit coming in the church and everything, and he's going to leave us again. But again, I would have doubts too, like, or I would be like curious or asking questions. And so, and again, I think even their faith, if you look at the explosion of Acts, was probably out of this, like, deconstructing a little bit of what they knew previous to then Jesus leaving, and then like, wow, now I can actually go and live stronger. So I think it's just a huge term that's used everywhere. But I think you're right on, Jaden. If it's used in a way that just is like, well, I'm just going to deconstruct it, that we're just going to tear everything down and we're just going to leave it in ruins and walk away from this, is a dangerous place to be. And so that's why I'm always big on like deconstruct, but talk with people, really process through. And do you have, again, not just peers, but people who can really pour into you in this season? I think that's where we get to come in as leaders.
yeah, I've had a situation like that recently. Walking with a married couple, they just recently had a baby, and they're younger than my husband and I. And they made a very, very fast decision. And we sat down with them because we're like, we care about you. The people that we've said we are, like, if there's ever we see something in your life, like, we have told you we're going to talk about it, and I hope that you're seeing that we're doing that. And we read the Bible to them, and we're like, this is where our foundation is at, and this is our perspective on it, that you guys are making a really poor choice. And they were like, well, and we're like, the Bible is clear. Like, there's no and an explanation that you guys are going to give. Like, the Bible is clear. And it's like, okay, that was hard, because there's a mourning of loss in that, of like, man, I really thought they would really believe it and believe in the Bible and what they say that they live by, and like God's words, their foundations, like that's not there yet. But there's also grace that I have to have towards that of like, okay, this is my opportunity not just to walk away and be frustrated and hurt because it does hurt me, but that's my part of the equation and something that I have to work through with God. But I still have to meet them where they're at and continue to love them because it's an opportunity to keep walking with them and to keep pointing them to God and to what the church can do and just the community that can come around them. So it it's hard when you experience hurt from people, but it's still an opportunity for us to rise and say, I still have to guide them, and I still have to lead them and teach them like what the truth is.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Any other thoughts there, Travis, there?
No, I agree with all that. I think it's very interesting. I think a lot of this deconstruction kind of thing comes about more culturally than really, having that biblical frame like it should. A lot of it is, social media stuff. That's where they hear it from. I know a lot of my old teens and stuff that I talked to, that's where they've kind of picked that up and they've seen people talk about it and things. And it's not really explained biblically. It's more of like, they want it to be biblically, kind of emphasis, but it's more of, it's kind of a cultural thing, like a trend, I guess you could say. I don't know if I'm right or wrong in that, but it's kind of what I see.
Yeah, can definitely feel that way. And again, is probably the older in this call for sure. I know it's something that at first I really wrestled with, and partly because I think again it would have been the generation I grew up into. You just didn't question or doubt. It was almost like I grew up in a church system where you really didn't have the chance to doubt much. It was like you really just you just you just accept it as truth, and it was more like fundamental, and it was just like this is the way it is. And you kind of went from high school to Bible college to ministry and everything else. And it wasn't until like the younger generations, I think, and the newer ones I was working with that actually pushed a little bit harder on that, so which is good. So, well, hey, let's close this out here. We've got a couple minutes left here. Again, it was kind of cool on pages 37 and 38. They kind of come back to the growing young stuff that they wrote a while back, Fuller Youth Institute, and Steve kind of obviously wove this into his book here. But again, whether it was for youth or for young adults, I think the core commitments are the same. Although it was focused more on growing young research, 250 churches, they kind of came down to like these 6 core commitments. Like if these churches can like live this out, this is actually going to help to grow our church younger and kind of be there for them. So the first one again is growing young churches cultivate empathy. So again, I love how it talks about it here. Definition that empathy seeks to understand people, the way they are doing things, and why, and why their physical and emotional needs, how they think about the world, and what is meaningful to them. Empathy is more than having good intentions. And so kind of this idea that, again, if we don't have empathy for young people, how can we cultivate this in the church? So think about this, not just from a young adult ministry, but like no matter the age, what can an 8-year-old teach an 18-year-old who can teach an 88-year-old? And what can an 88-year-old teach an 18-year-old who can teach an 8-year-old, right? So this moving all the way through ministry and stuff like that. So having again, cultivating empathy was one of them. The next one was young churches know how to neighbor. And again, I think we kind of talked about this earlier here with not just it's kind of what are we doing, not just across the seas, but what are we doing across the streets, right? Like what are we actually doing to neighbor with the people around us? How can we serve our communities? What can we do to be a part of what happens? How can we find ways to actually, again, get to know the young adults in the church and back, kind of like Jay, we talk about how can we get to know our neighbors? Like, who is my neighbor, right? Like, how can old and young and everybody else exist in between in the lobby of the church and really get to know one another? So again, empathy, know your neighbor. Next one is obviously no surprise, take Jesus' message seriously. And again, it's interesting how they don't just take the Bible serious, but again, they want to know again, and we got to do justice, right, to Old Testament, New Testament, everything. But again, there's a definite bend in the younger generations to like actually say, like, are we actually living out what Jesus has asked us to do? Which is why, again, you're going to see we talked about it last week a little bit more in with racial reconciliation, and we're going to see it a little bit more with young people who love to rally. We're seeing that even right now with everything that's happened between Palestine and Israel. We're finding college campuses being, grounds where they're making full statements and protests and presentations and everything else too, because it's close to their heart, and many would say it's close to the heart of Jesus. Like anytime someone is down and hurting, anytime someone's being oppressed, and it's not only God's heart, but it's the heart of Jesus. How do we care for people? So again, taking the message of Jesus seriously is the third one. The next one's a warm community. So again, that's a huge one as far as again, just making sure that again, everything from leadership to the church, the lobbies, to everything feels very warm. Like, what are we doing so that when they show up, they're just like, man, like we're home, right? It's like this is a part of who we are. The next one is prioritizing young people everywhere. So again, that's from staff to what you see on stage. Do you have a 18-year-old drummer who's up there, who's a girl on a platform on a Sunday and I love it. Like, we've got a young gal she's probably young 20. Actually, no, she's still probably 19. And when she drums, it's like people, the elders and the board and people coming to me, who was that young girl who was drumming today? Like, they just want to know. And I just remind them, like, man, like, young people have an incredible gift. And again, if she can drum in the church, like, imagine what that can do to change the culture of that. So prioritizing people everywhere. That's why I love, Jaden, you talking about even the this remodel and actually having the young people a part of it. So it's not just what the elders are going to see, but again, you're probably going to create a space and an atmosphere that's going to actually last longer than if you had somebody who's a 50-year-old designer come in and design it. So prioritizing young people everywhere. And the last one is keychain leadership. And that's this idea of, again, can we give the keys to the kingdom to young people? And do we trust young people? Do we trust residents? Do we trust young staff? Will we trust them with everything from the pulpit to, leading to, you name it? Like, will we do it? And I loved in the book, it was when one of the people they identified, it was when they were in high school, and it says that they recognized the keychain leadership when the youth pastor gave them the keys to the pop machine to go fill the pop machine, right? Like, it was kind of a funny thing about that. Like, but isn't that like the thing that, like, wow, like I was entrusted with an actual physical key to the church, to the youth room. This was my responsibility, was to make sure that this pop machine got filled. I opened it up and I filled the cans and did it. I thought, that's what we're talking about here, is how can we give keychain leadership over? And so whether it's young adults serving anywhere in the church or anything, young people everywhere, how can we see them and do it? So those are the big things there. So this chapter is really about faithing of young adults and growing young churches. And maybe even for us, kind of like as we kind of close out our time, would be like, of the statements about young adults and their spiritual lives listed in this chapter, which do you hear the most from your congregation? How can you typically respond, and how might you respond differently? So I think that's probably, the challenge for us, again, on page 40. And again, we're not going to talk through these, but, the challenge for young adults is, what might it look like for you to approach young adults' spiritual lives as a faithing process? Take a minute and pray that you may be open to spiritual conversations they really want to have with you. Act on your prayer by reaching out to starting conversations over a couple of them with coffee. And then for the congregation, it's more like, hey, how can we, again, our job is to always lead up and down. And how can we be that voice piece, right? Like, you guys are in the seats doing this in your churches. And how can you, remind people that, hey, in order for us to grow young, in order for us to be a church that's healthy with young people, like, we have to have empathy. We have to give over keychain leadership. We have to, have a warmth to who we are. We have to take the message of Jesus seriously. And so how do we continue to keep those before us? So great chapter. Again, I don't know that any of it was rocket science for any of us, but I think it did get us at least thinking and pursuing a little bit more, like, hey, here's kind of where we're at with young adult ministry. So that's chapter 2 here. Any other questions or thoughts you have about young adult ministry, or kind of where we're heading and going? I just said earlier, I have a lot of people who are like, hey, I need to fit this into my schedule. And I definitely want to have some guests in the next few weeks too. So I've got a few people coming in And like I said, we've got some great new initiatives with young adult ministry, even where your church is going to apply to be a part of a young adult cohort and stuff like that, and apply for scholarships and stuff like that to actually use real dollars to invest in the lives of young adults in your community. So you'll be hearing more about that. We'll be having a team of people, like I said, at Follow, and we're working really, really hard to get Steve not just on the call with us, but actually to be at Follow to train young adult leaders, and also to again, we're looking to create a meal time at Follow too, where we're looking for 50 churches to come to a meal to hear all about young adult ministry, and that we'll kind of just trying to put that together on us, and where you can learn more about how to be a part of this young adult cohorts and stuff like that we're looking to form. Sound good? Awesome. Well, hey, reach out if you guys know others who are around, who would love to jump in. Feel free, and yeah, we'll keep cruising. Next week I'll be in Durango, Colorado somewhere, but at a place. But we'll jump on from there, and I'll send a reminder out and add you guys to text list too. That won't be spam text up, but they'll actually be sent to you individually from my phone too. So okay. Awesome. Well, hey, I got to run to another meeting, but let's stay connected. And if you need anything, let me know. Okay. All right. We'll chat soon, you guys. All right.